Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Fornax and today I'm talking about Johnny Silverhand, Cd Projekt Red, and indulging in a little fangirl speculation. Now, if you are just here for Johnny, and I certainly can't blame you for that, there are timestamps below. So, Cd Projekt Red and its Cyberpunk 2077 showcase seems to have, won E3 this year, and not just because of the sci-fi action superstar and living legend that is Mr. Keanu Reeves. No, not just because of that, but also because they actually understand their audience. In fact, in all the ways that matter, they are representational of their audience, because unlike other sterile, creativity-stifling AAA developers, the personal passion and commitment to the worlds of adventure and imagination they create is palpable at every level of management and development. And we, their fans, love them for it and shower them with our support. Not just by buying their titles, which we do merrily, but by being heralds of their work, sharing it across the globe, creating communities dedicated to these much-loved franchises, and of course all the fan-generated cosplay, crossplay, fan art, fan fiction, and of course videos like this one. So as a fan, I want to show my love to the good ship Cd Projekt Red and all who sail in her. You are genuinely the answer to the festering infiltration of corporate tyranny which has unfortunately burrowed its way into the heart of game development. Your successes show there is a way to make wonderful, profitable games without resorting to the toxic exploitation of gamers. But you, dear listener, are not here to listen to me blow sunshine up Projekt Red's bottom. No matter how richly deserved it may be, you want to know about Johnny Silverhand, and yet before we jump in, I'm throwing a warning here. Firstly, at this stage in the game, it is unclear to outsiders like me how much of the Cyberpunk pen and paper canon has survived the reimagining of the franchise, so please keep that in mind. And secondly, if any of this does hit home, if they have retained the lore, then there are potential spoilers for Mr. Silverhand's story, and I would absolutely hate to ruin anyone's enjoyment of the game, so please consider yourselves all duly warned. Now, the burning question for those new to Cyberpunk is, who's Johnny Silverhand and what the heck's a rocker boy? So to understand Johnny Silverhand's place in the Cyberpunk universe and that of the rocker boy, I direct you to real-world artists and musicians like Rage Against the Machine, Green Day, the Sex Pistols, and to my mind, the one band that typifies Mr. Silverhand and his confrontational activism and ethos is actually Pussy Riot. Now, for anyone who do not know the group, Pussy Riot is a Russian punk rock band based in Moscow. They use their music to fight for equality, LGBT rights, challenging directly the far-right, totalitarian cabals of Vladimir Putin. I think I just made a list of some description. Oh dear God. Anyway, for their defiance, they have been brutally beaten and physically assaulted by government authorities and vilified by the Putin-controlled press, as well as, actually imprisoned and financially crippled by the state. So, if that sounds shocking, that is the path of Johnny Silverhand. Now, I also want you to conjure in your mind the greatest orators of modern history like Malcolm X and JFK and Martin Luther King Jr. And now I want you to consider the people who were rallied. Think back to the Occupy movement, which shook the powerful from New York to London and beyond. Now, this is the kind of legacy of Johnny Silverhand, a legendary rebel, musician, activist, and much, much more. And that is what a rocker boy is. Inspirational, musical activist, I guess, is the best description. Now, life mirrors art, and art life in Cyberpunk 2020. Corporate power is, it's absolute. Sound familiar? And the city was so saturated by tyranny that most of its denizens didn't even register it. Fish don't know they're in water, I guess. Now, there are, of course, a number of iterations and alternative narratives for Johnny Silverhand within the canon, but the fact that he was a charismatic artist and activist able to inspire his followers and capable of enacting real-world change, well, that is a truth no lawmaster would argue against. So, how did he do it? Well, at first with the band Samurai as their lead singer, and later as a solo artist. The music he and they created gave voice to a generation lost to shareholder corporate greed and the denigration and dehumanization of ordinary working people and those who embraced cybertech. Only the rich had rights to whatever the hell they wanted. There is a reason tyrants fear and attack the freedom of expression of artists and the freedom of the press, because the power to change the hearts and minds of the masses is far too potent a weapon for weak and corrupt leaders. Through sharing his personal struggles and failings, he spoke to the pain of the many, and by pointing a spotlight at the suffering of others and revealing the true criminality of the corporations and the governments captured by their wealth, he opened the eyes of millions. But of course, in this world and in Cyberpunk, no good deed goes unpunished, and Johnny earned the ire of too many very rich, very powerful people. Now, to understand why this 2020 icon persists in 2077, looking, I have to say, remarkably well for a man in his 80s. And they picked Keanu very well for the memes of his immortality. But getting back to Johnny, we have to dive back into the timelines and stories behind Johnny Silverhand and his ex-girlfriend, Alt Cunningham, a netrunner of extraordinary talent, and a very evil 101-year-old CEO of the Arasaka Corporation, Saburo Arasaka. And it only gets more complicated from here. Alt Cunningham is, in kind of real-world terms, a genius software engineer and hacker who developed a program she called Soul Killer. Now, netrunners live to break into systems. Corporate espionage is and was a very lucrative business in Light City, but Soul Killer did not hack a computer system. It hacked the human mind, being able to make a digital copy of it. Now, imagine being able to kidnap a politician or a research scientist of a rival company. Instead of the arduous task of breaking a person, torture being a profoundly unreliable method of extracting timely and useful information. Instead, you simply grab, download a copy of the victim's mind, leaving you all the time in the world to scan through this mental treasure trove of information. Basically, Alt Cunningham had created a license to print money, but unfortunately for her, Saburo Arasaka discovered her breakthrough and, well, he took steps to relieve her of the burden of such an immoral piece of tech. More accurately, he kidnapped Alt, brutally tortured her, and forced her to work with his engineers to create a new iteration of Soul Killer, ensuring it destroyed the mind of the victim once the copying process had been completed. Now, sadly for Alt, to add a significant insult to already grievous injury, she became the first victim of a Soul Killer, but perhaps because of her years of netrunning and the deep connection to that second synthetic reality which netrunners learned to inhabit, her digitized mind retained its sentience and was able to hide inside the Arasaka Corporation labyrinthian computer network. Now we're into timeline 1. Johnny Silverhand in this timeline is unaware of Alt Cunningham's plight until he took a contract with Militech against the Arasaka Corporation during the corporate wars of the Firestorm Sourcebook storyline. The contracted team consisted of Silverhand, Spider, Murphy, and Morgan Blackhand. Their mission was to infiltrate and destroy Arasaka's data center with a small nuclear device, which would go on to destroy most of the city. But during this ill-fated incursion, Johnny discovers Alt's fate thinking of her still trapped, a ghost in the machine, he goes completely off mission in an attempt to save what is left of his love. And fortunately for him and old Spider, Murphy agrees to help the rocker boy. So, with great personal sacrifice, Johnny is able to grant Murphy the time he needs to break Alt out of the mainframe and into the open waters of the free net. But the price was his life. It was reported that he died at the hands of Adam Smasher, an Arasaka cyborg, and that is apparently, for this timeline, where his story ends. So how is the beautiful Keanu Reeves as Johnny Silverhand in 2077? And now we go into second timeline. There is another instance of this same story in the scenario Never Fade Away, found in the Cyberpunk 2020 second edition sourcebook. So in this altered history, Johnny Silverhand is still the same charismatic activist, lead singer of Samurai. Alt Cunningham is still his ill-fated lover who created Soulkeeper and was kidnapped by a murderous centenarian. All the same, but in this scenario, Johnny Silverhand infiltrates the Arasaka Corporation specifically to save Alt Cunningham. Unfortunately, no matter the timeline, the mission to save Alt never pans out. Not quite so bad as a thermonuclear detonation which wiped out 50% of Night City, but in this timeline, despite all his efforts, Silverhand believes he has failed his lover when he finds Alt's lifeless form in the corporation's headquarters. Now, in reality, Alt had already saved herself, her mind at any rate at the cost of her body, but with no way to convey that information to Johnny, she was forced to watch him as he stood over her empty shell, truly believing she was dead. Now, for Johnny, the death of Alt only spurred on his lifelong battle for justice, and he went on to target even larger, more dangerous foes in his righteous crusade. Now, to be sure, he had made enemies before her death. For example, a music executive had uncovered his life before he became Johnny Silverhand and attempted to blackmail him. This could well have derailed his juggernaut of a career. You see, the man behind the legend, at least in this timeline, was Robert John Linder, a US Marine. Heroes are not born. They are forged by the cruelty of the world, and him and his fellow Marines in their thousands were used in illegal government cybertech experiments. And once they had been, I'm going to say enhanced, the soldiers were fed into the jaws of the Second Nicaraguan War. Hundreds were killed, and even more fled, their bodies and minds doubly broken by experimentation and war. Now, Johnny could well have buckled under such a personal attack, but instead of submitting to the demands of his blackmailer, Johnny penned and recorded his first solo album, Sins of Your Brothers. In it, the songs laid bare his life before fame and the tragedy of the men and women who were used, abused, and abandoned and criminalized by the country they had fought for. In sharing his darkest moment, Marine Robert John Linder regained his honor and that of countless veterans, culminating in an amnesty for AWOL vets from those South American wars, men and women finally able to come home to their families after decades in the wilderness. This was a real victory which changed the lives of thousands. But in shaming the administration, he set off a chain of events, specifically assassinations, which would change his life forever. The first attempt was by the Biotechnica Corporation just before the release of Johnny's album Clone Wars, chronicling the systematic abuse in human cloning and genetic engineering, which this corporation were up to their eyeballs in. Now, I really shouldn't call it an attempt, because in reality, the attack did claim Johnny's body, but thanks to Alt Cunningham, not his mind. As we know, Alt's mind survived in both timelines And here in this story, Alt finds Silverhand a few months after the attempted assassination in a cryo tank on the edge of death. She offers Johnny a chance to live, but he will have to sacrifice his body and take advantage of the very cloning biotech he has been railing against. Now you see, Alt had managed to engineer and clone a body for herself, giving herself a second life, and she offered to furnish Johnny with one if he would give his consent. After months in recovery and hiding, Johnny Mark II would release the Clone Wars album, determined to highlight the possible abuses of this burgeoning technology, even at his own expense. Now, Assassination Attempt 2 happened 7 years later, whilst working on the album Tomorrow's Child, which catalogued the US government's litany of failures and outright neglect of children suffering from the carbon death plague. Now, the US government successfully ended the rocker boy's life to avoid the humiliation and backlash that would have resulted after the album's release. But, of course, Alt Cunningham could not let her old flame die. Using those same tissue samples and data from 7 years before, she created another Johnny Silverhand clone. So all that gives us a reasonable answer as to the potential of how Mr. Silverhand, or the third generation clone of his consciousness, is able to exist in 2077, and it could also offer hints at what his role in the story might be. So I'm going to do a little bit of speculation now. In the Never Fade Away scenario, Silverhand acts as a guide for new RPers, hand-holding them through the twists and turns of the new unfamiliar world of Cyberpunk. Could he be reprising his role as mentor and guide for the early journey of V? I mean, we don't know when this particular part of the story takes place, so it's entirely possible. And I will point out that the sharp-eyed amongst you may have noted that we see Mr. Silverhand not once, but twice in the E3 footage. We see him here as well. Hello, handsome. Okay, so in my mind, this begs the question, exactly how corporeal is this version of Johnny Silverhand? Could he be a ghost in the machine too, like Alt? An all but immortal consciousness, free to ride the wave of the open net? There are hints in the story that apparently V is hunting for a device which grants immortality. So is Silverhand the gatekeeper of this tech, waiting to gift eternal cyber life to the worthy, or is he a potential destroyer of it, wanting to ensure that old monsters like Saburo can't reign forever? There is, of course, much lore to discover about Johnny Silverhand and his entourage, but I think I have covered the basics here, and this video is probably already too long. So if there is any particular aspect of cyberpunk lore you would like me to dive into, please let me know below, and do share your thoughts on the meaning of Mr. Silverhand's appearance in 2077 and what you think about Keanu Reeves. Personally, I am absolutely thrilled. I just want them to make another Constantine as well, but, you know, girl can dream. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe, and show some love to Ada, Carb, Hain, Molini, Sir Azu, Jolly Joestar, Doug Smith, Shaggy, Samuel, Dylan, Moserman, Chak Lang, Anton Salvik, Dark Griever, and all my wondrous patrons, without whom I would be unable to dedicate the time and resources I do to my channel. I could never thank you all enough. Now, I hope you will join me again very soon for more rambling gaming lore. But until then, as always, thanks for watching.